Sup. Nightreign got a pretty big update recently. It added that new hard mode, that Deep of Night mode as it's called, and they also did some balancing changes for the characters. Given the almost weekly surprises that we've had with the Everdark Sovereign fights, I had weirdly high hopes for this new Deep of Night mode, but unfortunately it fails to meet my expectations, which I will admit were pretty high. But bear with me because I think that my overall thoughts in the end are pretty measured. So let me start with what I think can swing a run one way or another the most, and I think that's the new passive effects and the new passives kind of system that they have with this new Deep of Night mode. The negative passives can be very swingy, where either they are completely negligible or they're so bad that I just don't want to pick them up. And I know that part of this is just because I'm so used to them only being positives, or, at the very least neutral, where it's like you're playing Wilder and you get something for spell buff and so it doesn't matter. But I think I went into this a bit more open-minded than that, but I was still a little disappointed by just how negative some of these are. Like, it doesn't really make me change how I play, really, it just makes me not want to pick up those items. And you could say maybe that's the point, it's to make the loot a little bit more hard to find, a little bit more difficult to pick and choose what you actually want to take. But that still doesn't really change how I play in the end. Like, I can still just use my starting weapon, which I've had to do in runs before this Deep of Night mode. So in the end, you just kind of take the ones that have the least relevant or the most minimal debuffs, and that doesn't really feel all that good. I feel like these debuffs and the whole debuff system could just work a little bit better, flow a bit better with the rest of the mechanics in the game. It feels weirdly tacked on. You might be thinking, well, this isn't much of a critique. I mean, these are, for the most part, just negative versions of the positive buffs that we had, and you're kind of right. But at the same time, I've played many other games where these negative debuffs can actually be really interesting. Many different games that I've played have things like cursed items where they're usually pretty good or even really good, but then the drawback is that they're stuck in whatever item slot that they were put into. And then there's no real way for you to uncurse yourself very easily. You usually have to do something where you go out of your way to do it, or you need to obtain some really hard to find item to undo the curse or something. But I think that would be really interesting, especially since your equipment slots are so limited. You only have 6 and then 4 item slots. And I know you can get more if you get the small pouch, but for most people, in most runs, it's going to be 4 item slots. And even though that's less important than the equipment slots, it's still more limited, so it'd be really interesting to see that happen, even if nothing really works alongside the items right now. But it's that kind of non-statistical change that I think is really interesting and can make taking these things with the negative effects a lot more interesting. Just things that are generally not numbers tweaks, or at least not very player-facing numbers tweaks. Like messing with the attack speed of a weapon is kind of interesting because that's not strictly like a number thing, it's just kind of a player feel sort of deal. But imagine Wilder using a great sword that plays just how it normally does, and then getting another sword that's basically just a colossal sword with its speed, and I guess the moveset because it's Wilder, so maybe this isn't the best example, but you get what I mean. Again, this game kind of has infinite potential, so anything you can come up with would probably be a pretty good addition for them to add for these kind of curses or negative effects. I'm just a little sad to see purely statistical changes is all, I suppose, because I've played so many games where that's all that they do. A lot of looter-style games like Titan Quest or like Borderlands really rely on these statistical changes for their new weapons and pickups and stuff, and I'm just pretty sick of it at this point. While I'm still talking about the negatives, as in the negative things about the new update, but also negative effects, as in negative effects to the character. Wow, this is great. Are you confused yet? But speaking of that, the negative relic effects are pretty bad too. At least in my experience, I have pretty bad luck just in general, so most of the ones that I've gotten from runs have been pretty bad. And usually the positives don't really counteract it very well. I'll get improved throwing pot damage, and then minus dexterity, minus intelligence. And this is on someone like Duchess, and I just can't justify ever using that. I don't think you could either. Could you? I do find it really interesting that there are character-specific stat changes with negative effects, because that no longer feels like a negative. It feels more like tweaking the character to be more how you would want them to be. Like, if you want to play a version of Duchess that relies more on spellcasting than using the dagger, you can take increased intelligence, lowered dexterity. And I find that really interesting. That's actually the fine-tuning that I was really hoping that they would add in this update. Ultimately, though, I find it kind of weird that all of these negative effects and these kind of stat-changing effects are in the Deep of Night mode only, because this kind of feels like what should have been in the base game, and then the purely positive buffs and rewards would be your reward for doing the Deep of Night. That's just kind of how most other games would probably do it, right? Like, you get rewarded for doing the more difficult thing with things that affect you more positively. But on the other hand, you could say that people who want to do the Deep of Night mode want it to be harder, so taking these things that make it harder for them, and then also playing the mode that is harder, is kind of a reward for these people. But speaking of the runs themselves just being harder in general, let's talk about that a little bit. Honestly, there's actually not much to say, unfortunately. Again, it's just a statistical change for the enemies. They do more damage, they have more health. It's pretty standard stuff. I guess you could say this is like the New Game Plus, and then each depth of night, like 2, 3, 4, 5, would correspond to like a New Game Plus 2, New Game Plus 3, New Game Plus 4, so on and so forth. I'm pretty sure it only goes up to 5, so on and so forth. It's just one more. Sorry about that. So to me, that's kind of boring, but what I do really like are the red enemies that can spawn during a run. Especially when they are in a camp, or in a ruins, or just in a general group. It can really shift who I consider the biggest priority to take out in these groups, and I find that really fun, because that's the extra little amount of variation in these runs that I was really hoping for in the base game. They really make it so I can't just fall back on muscle memory with these areas, and I have to at least just put that little extra effort into how I approach everything. I find it really fun, and also just the visual is really striking, and it makes them feel a lot more intimidating, especially if you get something like Bell-Bearing Hunter who's red. That is terrifying. And the last thing that I wanted to talk about was some of the balance changes to the characters themselves and their just base stats and their base attributes. I think this was really needed. I have a friend who really likes playing Recluse, and his biggest problem that he had with her was that the magic cocktail took way too long and felt way too weak, so seeing those two things get buffed was really big for him. My favorite character when I started playing was actually Guardian, and I stopped playing him because he started falling behind everyone else once, we all got better at the game, and I started realizing that defense really just doesn't cut it in the base game. You really do need to do more damage so you can kill enemies faster, so you can get more loot, and then complete the run in a much better state, obviously. So seeing him get buffed strength and dexterity from level ups is going to be huge for him. So I think. I haven't done enough runs to really get the feel for that yet, but if it doesn't, that's kind of the appeal of games like this that are sort of live servicey. They can just have another patch and make him even better and bring him back up to par with everybody else. So all in all, this update really wasn't for me, and that's fine. I have really weird opinions on these games and the series overall, so I don't really expect them to pander or cater to me specifically and my weird tastes. And if you watched my first video about Nightreign, you would see that I do have some pretty weird tastes and some weird takes when it comes to this game, but it is what it is. I just don't really get much out of New Game Plus runs, and this is for the people who do. So, for those of you who are those kinds of players, good for you. I hope you have a lot of fun. For me, this is where I kind of start to drop off and play some other games, at least for the meantime. When the DLC comes out, or if another cool update comes out, I'll be right back playing, admittedly, probably too many runs. Also, just for the sake of having my thoughts here, some of the additions that I would want to see in the game would be having a mode where you can push to a shorter day 3 or day 4 or so on for as many as would be deemed allowable, I suppose, where you can just push your characters to get that little extra, you know, maybe there was a couple Everjails that you still wanted to run to, or ruins you really wanted to do, but you couldn't. And then you could have the boss be tougher through being like a forced Everdark version. And you could also up the difficulty with that as well by having their attack pattern slightly shuffled around. Like they don't add anything new and they don't tweak numbers, they just make it so one attack phases into another one more smoothly, or maybe even choppily. I mean, throw off the rhythm, you know? I'm still going to stand by this, but I'd also love to see a true randomized version that even affects the characters too. Make it so my character's random. I get to play like Guardian, who has Executor's passive, and then Wilder's ult. That'd be really cool. Just completely changes the way you play the game. I really like stuff that really plays off the game's unique mechanics rather than just statistical changes. But until then, I'm gonna play some other games. I have a Silksong video that I want to release soon, so look forward to that if you care about that. If not, I do want to start playing some other games and talking about those. I'll talk about the Soul series. I want to kind of intertwine those games with some other games. There'll still probably be things you know about, so don't worry about that. And maybe I'll start talking about some games you don't know about. Hopefully you'll stick around for those. But yeah, thanks for watching if you watched this long, and thanks for subscribing if you did. You know, if you did watch this long, maybe like the video, leave a comment down below. If you didn't like this video but you still watched this long, subscribe. That's what you should do. Oh, I'd get so mad. Oh, that'd really hurt my feelings. Are you still watching? Wait, you think I'm gonna say something cool? Think I'm gonna do something cool? Oh, dude, you want to see me do a flip? Check this out.